In this next video, we're actually going to cover two sections of this chapter, just because they're very brief. Now, unfortunately, these are two really interesting types of disorders, but they're very brief because they're really, really rare. So if you're really interested in these, you can find a lot more details in the textbook, or maybe spend a little bit of time on YouTube and see some people talking about them. But the first of our really cool and really quick disorders to discuss is going to be the somatic symptom disorders. Go to the right page here. So somatic symptom disorders used to be called somatoform disorders. So you might see some terminology floating around with that title to them. But these kinds of disorders tend to involve physical complaints that suggest some kind of medical problem, but don't actually have any known biological cause. Basically, where people report that something is wrong, that they feel something, that they're experiencing something, but there isn't a physical cause to back up those complaints. And there's three categories of this that we can talk about. The first is hypochondriasis, which more recently has started to be called illness anxiety disorder. But if someone is a hypochondriac, that's where this comes from. And so if you have been diagnosed with this, it's basically someone who is unduly alarmed about their physical symptoms, and they assume that there is something wrong with them when medically there really isn't anything wrong with them. So these are people who are over convinced that there's something wrong with them and there isn't anything biologically wrong. Similarly, individuals who are diagnosed with a pain disorder are typically experiencing pain that's completely out of proportion to what they should actually be experiencing. So either they do have a medical disorder, but they're experiencing far more pain than should be caused by that disorder, or they're experiencing pain and there is no biological cause for that pain that can be found. Now, the coolest of the three, in my humble opinion, is what's called a functional neurological symptom disorder, which is more commonly known as a conversion disorder. And this is basically when serious neurological symptoms, things like paralysis, loss of sensation, or even blindness, occur with little or no warning. And again, there's still no indication, there's no physical cause for this neurological problem to be happening. So doctors can run studies that say that the visual cortex of your brain is operating fine, your eyes are functioning normally, but people might still report being blind, being unable to see. Or, again, really, really cool, this diagram here is showing what's called glove anesthesia, which is a specific conversion disorder where people lose all feeling in this blue area. So basically anything below their wrist, they report that they can't feel it. But if we look at how the nerves are arranged in the body, we have three nerves that deal with our fingers, and all three of them are not exclusive to the hand. They also have, actually four, because I guess this part here is a slightly different color too. If we count the thumb, which we should. So there's four different nerves, and all of them cover the hand and part of the arm. So there is no reason why sensation should cut off at the wrist specifically. So again, biologically, there is no way that this can be happening, but people still experience that loss of sensation below the wrist. So these conversion disorders have all sorts of interesting cases where people are experiencing these intense issues with no biological reason for them. Our next, rather brief discussion will be about dissociative disorders. Now this section, we're going to build a little bit on, again, our conversation about personality. So we've done a chapter where we talked about personality. And in a normal individual, a non-disordered individual, our personality has this sort of coherence where we can integrate all aspects of ourselves. We can remember the things that we're doing. We have a sense of self. We have our actions, our thoughts, and our feelings all come together with some kind of consistency. And our memory plays a pretty critical role in that level of consistency. However, individuals who have some dissociative disorder have a problem at some level of that integration. So we can talk about 3 specific kinds of dissociative disorders. We have psychogenic amnesia, psychogenic fugue, and dissociative identity disorder. So the first of these, the psychogenic amnesia, is basically following trauma, usually a very severe trauma. Individuals will have very intense memory loss, but that memory loss tends to be very selective. So they will ignore, say, anything related to an event that caused them trauma. They might they might intentionally forget certain people or certain parts of their past, places, events, objects, but other components of their memory are still intact. So it's not a true retrograde or anterograde amnesia. It's just like certain parts of their past, specifically those parts related to trauma, are kind of cut out and removed. So a really interesting special case there. Our psychogenic fugue is a much more rare type of dissociative disorder. And again, it's usually related to some form of trauma, but individuals who experience this tend to lose all sense of personal identity. They forget who they are. They tend to walk away from their lives and wander off. And some people who've gone through this psychogenic fugue end up leaving their life, going somewhere else, settling down, and becoming a completely different person with no memory of who they were or what they were doing before. So even individuals who had been married, they might wander off, get remarried as a completely new person, and have no recollection of their previous life. Now, this fugue state will end at some point when they reintegrate their personality, when they come back to themselves. They tend to describe it as waking up. And when they do so, they tend to feel confused because they don't necessarily remember what they did when they were in that fugue state. So if they moved somewhere and started a new life, they don't necessarily remember that new life. So again, a really weird situation and a very rare one as well. And the last, which again, very, very cool, they always list the coolest at the end, dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called split personality disorder. And this is the idea that an individual has 2 or more separate and distinct personalities housed within a single body. Now, because this is such a sort of vivid image, dissociative identity disorder or split personalities has been represented fairly frequently in the media. You see it in movies, TV shows, in books. And it's one of those things where it is very, very, very rare. Before it was publicized in the media, there had been as few as 100 cases that were ever reported. We'll come back to that in a minute because it's gotten a lot more out of hand since then. But the idea here is that each identity housed within that individual is unique. And these individuals, these identities, each have a set of memories and thoughts and ideas. And the idea being that maybe each identity has arisen to serve a particular role. In most cases, I believe it was 97 out of 100 of the original cases that were ever proposed, that 97% of people had had severe childhood trauma. And so the idea was that a stronger personality had arisen, a stronger identity had taken over to help the child get through tough traumatic situations that they couldn't have handled otherwise. So they had a strong personality that would take over, that would be tough in that situation, and the original identity, who the child originally was, may not be any the wiser. They might not know that that other identity even exists. Now, I'm sure you can imagine this is a very controversial diagnosis. It was very, very rare to begin with, and the prevalence of it has skyrocketed since it's been popularized in the media. So there's a lot of argument that this might be something like how we handle hypnosis, where our expectations, this assumption of what people should experience or what we should be seeing, tends to manifest in what we actually see. And so there isn't any sort of concrete proof that this is something that happens. Some people think that it's a complete lie, that it can't happen. Some people think that it happens, but not to the extent that we're seeing it, because nowadays there are thousands of cases reported of this, very few of which tend to show enough evidence to give us an idea that it's actually happening. But again, very, very cool disorder, a very interesting topic, and lots of research ongoing on it, but nothing really concrete, which is interesting.